Well, first of all, let me just say thank you to you all. This is my first time presenting a paper in front of fellow Tolkien scholars, and you've given me a lot to think about. And this is a good thing, as I will be entering the final year of my PhD on Tolkien, and there are some changes to my wording, things that I need to be a little bit more careful about, that previous conferences sharing this with scholars of other disciplines have not brought up. So I am grateful for that. And with that said, here we go. So, as I think we've pretty much acknowledged to be clear, and particularly from my reading, The Lord of the Rings is saturated with Tolkien's moral and theological vision. And so this essay is going to be coming from a theological perspective, particularly interacting with ideas of spiritual formation or of growth and transformation in the human soul. So, in order to do this, I will follow in Tolkien's footsteps and coin my own terms to frame the discussion. Just as he refers to eucatastrophe and dyscatastrophe, as we have already discussed, I will refer to spiritual growth as euformation and spiritual corruption as dysformation. I know it says I'll be talking about Saruman and Frodo, but mostly I'm just going to talk about Saruman and just kind of briefly touch on Frodo at the end. So, with Saruman, we see a unique dysformative journey that's characterized by a qualified loss of immortality. And I say qualified, we can talk more about it later. From a disembodied pure spirit as a Maya, to beastliness and ultimately to nothingness. By contrast, Frodo and his euformative journey is characterized by the exercise of pity, and because of this, he's offered the closest thing a mortal can receive to immortality within Arda. So, Saruman. As one of the Astari, Saruman was sent to Middle-earth to kindle the hearts of elves and men to withstand the corruption and evil of Sauron. But they were not sent in their natural angelic forms. Instead, they came clad in bodies as of men, real and not feigned, subject to fears and pains and weariness of birth, able to hunger and thirst to be slain. They were sent as agents of euformative community to encourage the flourishing of all creatures opposed to Saruman. As one sent in this manner, Saruman enters Middle-earth uncorrupted by evil. And yet Tolkien notes that the Astari, obviously, can fall away from their purpose and do evil, forgetting the good in the search for the power to effect it. And that's from Unfinished Tales. To this evil, Saruman succumbs. And well before Tolkien introduces him, he has become famous. The only glimpse we receive of what he once was comes in Gandalf's return as Gandalf the White, or Saruman as he should have been. If we follow Gandalf from his return onward, and I guess we could even look earlier and see the seeds of this forming, we will witness his power to create euformative community wherever he goes. And we'll see what Saruman was capable of before his fall. So, as you all know, Saruman shows up basically 4 times in the text. And each of these 4 appearances, I'll argue, show a descent. They show a loss of self. Initially, he's an Astari, and though it's not really a descent, I'm going to phrase it as he falls from being an Astari to being a Maya, because it's a change in his purpose and intent. From Maya to essentially human, and from human to orc, and then basically from orc to a rejected spirit. So, while the first stage in his dysformation happens before we first meet him, the change is obvious when we encounter him in Gandalf's report to the Council of Elrond. He shares that when he arrived at Isengard, Saruman called himself Saruman of many colors. And Gandalf then says that he likes white better, to which Saruman replies, "White cloth may be dyed, the white page can be overwritten, and the white light can be broken." Gandalf's response is telling. He says, "In which case it is no longer white. And he that breaks the thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom." Saruman has left the path of wisdom, abdicating his position as an Istari in an attempt to become the master and ruler of Middle-earth. While his change is not necessarily one of form or substance, it is a change in telos, and is only the first step on a slippery downward slope. In not just failing to serve, but refusing to serve, he has initiated a process of dysformation that will result in changes to his body and soul. This fall will become more pronounced as we proceed. When the characters next encounter Saruman, he does not know of Gandalf's new stature. This time, his dysformation reveals itself in the way he uses his voice as a weapon to break down the bonds of euformative community Gandalf has built. Quote, having lost any devotion to other persons or causes, as Tolkien describes him in Unfinished Tales, Saruman's voice aims to engender in others the same loss. But the successive voices of Gimli and Eomer break the spell, revealing Saruman's true nature and causing him to lose control of his voice, leaving those previously swayed by it to shudder and make its change. Saruman masters himself and gathers his power for one last attempt at domination and persuasion, but this time he foolishly aims for Gandalf. This final exercise of power offers an even clearer glimpse into this dysformative use of Saruman's voice. And here I'll quote at length. Now the spell was wholly different. They heard the gentle remonstrance of a kindly king with an erring but much-loved minister. But they were shut out, listening at a door to words not meant for them. Ill-mannered children or stupid servants, overhearing the elusive discourse of their elders, and wondering how it would affect their lot. It was inevitable that they should make alliance. Gandalf would ascend into the tower to discuss deep things beyond their comprehension in the high chambers of Orthanc. The door would be closed, and they would be left outside, dismissed to await allotted work or punishment. For Gandalf's power and presence generate communities where people can be ennobled. Saruman's voice creates barriers and distinctions. Where Gandalf encourages fellowship, Saruman brings division. But then, Gandalf laughs and informs Saruman of the change in their respective situations, saying, I fear I am beyond your comprehension. Had Saruman not fallen so far, he would see what Gandalf has become, but his inability emphasizes his loss. No mortals, not even the wisest in Middle-earth, can understand what Gandalf has become because they have no real context by which to understand. That Saruman is incapable demonstrates that he has become no more than human, though his physical change awaits the scene's conclusion. And yet, Saruman is not beyond hope, and this is crucial. Even considering how debased and disformed he has become, clemency is still available. The chance to enter into the life-giving euformative community Gandalf establishes is offered, but Saruman cannot bring himself to accept. When at last he speaks, his voice has become shrill and cold. Pride and hatred have won their short-lived battle against uncertainty and guilt. Gandalf makes the offer a second time, but again Saruman refuses. And so, at last, Gandalf exerts his power. This breaker of community, the sower of dysformative, cannot be allowed to continue in this manner. Gandalf commands Saruman to return, and Saruman has no choice but to obey. He turns back, and as if dragged against his will, returns to the encounter. Gandalf denounces Saruman, exposing his sin and folly for all to see. Saruman, he cried, and his voice grew in power and authority. Behold, I am not Gandalf the Grey, whom you betrayed. I am Gandalf the White, who has returned from death. You have no color now, and I cast you from the order and from the council. He raised his hand and spoke slowly in a clear, cold voice. Saruman, your staff is broken. There was a crack, and the staff split asunder in Saruman's hand, and the head of it fell down at Gandalf's feet. Go, said Gandalf. With a cry, Saruman fell down and crawled away. Saruman will not willingly admit to his wrongdoing, repent and surrender his staff, so Gandalf unveils himself, not quite in the same way he does in other scenes, but still, he brings his power to bear in a unique kind of way, revealing the new reality with which Saruman must account. He strips Saruman of his rank, position, and power, and in doing so effects a permanent change in his body to match the change in his soul. In Tolkien's work, outer appearance matches inner reality. So when the characters next encounter Saruman, he is utterly changed. His appearance reflects the reality of his soul, but because the change is recent, the likeness is not yet complete. Instead, he merely looks like a surly old beggar. After Saruman rejects the offered mercy one final time, Gandalf observes, "I fear nothing more can be near him. He is withered altogether. All the same, I fancy he could do some mischief still in a small mean way." Petty meanness is all that is left to Saruman. He has withered altogether in body and in soul, and no great acts remain. Yet even this lessened stature will fall away. He has made his choice and will follow it to the bitter end. Saruman then goes to the Shire to ruin and destroy, if he can, what was good and pure. He goes to exercise his petty vengeance upon those he perceives to have wronged him, expanding his dysformative community within the Shire, and drawing out the ugliness and death resident within its members. As the hobbits walk through their devastated but not ruined homeland, they see the results of Saruman's fall. The random, senseless destruction of the land reveals that Saruman has lost even the last shreds of humanity and descended to the level of a mere beast, or worse. This is, in fact, the true state of his soul, which is revealed after his death. And as you're all familiar with, one of the most striking passages in the whole of the Lord of the Rings, to my mind, the hobbits witness Saruman's soul leaving his body as a gray mist rising slowly to a great height like smoke from a fire. He looks to the west, to the land from whence it came, but out of the west came a cold wind, and it bent away, and with a sigh dissolved into nothing. Saruman's soul here in my reading is rejected by those who sent him, and his passage back to the uncorrupted lands is denied. As Tolkien elsewhere writes in Unfinished Tales, his spirit went whithersoever it was doomed to go, and to Middle-earth, whether naked or embodied, came never back. But the revelation of his soul's true state also reveals the corruption of his body. Frodo looks away from Saruman's rejected and dispersed spirit to the body before him, with pity and horror, for as he looked, it seemed that long years of death were suddenly revealed. Fleshly decay mirrors his barren soul. Outer appearance at last matches inner reality. Now, while his descent from Istari to beast is a real loss, Saruman's true loss runs deeper still. What matters most is the lost relationships and capacities. He begins as one who can experience relationship and empower community, but ends as one who breaks communities and cuts himself off from others so fully that he becomes no one and no thing. He loses his access to euformative fellowship and loses his immortality in the process. So, now to Frodo, very briefly. Frodo's journey is obviously very different. We see him at the beginning. He's a typical hobbit, enjoying the comforts of his stable and prosperous life. Yet, we see that he longs for something else, for something different, hence his frequent and growing kind of wanderings and his encounters with the elves. We see him agree to take the ring on a perilous journey, to leave friends and comforts behind, renounce his place in the world for uncertainty, fear, and loss. We see him suffering under the burden of the ring, and we see this suffering cause a light to grow steadily stronger within him. We see him stagger and struggle onward as his burden grows. We see him briefly unveiled, the outer matching the inner for a few moments, as his inner brightness shines out in contrast to Gollum's shrunken and shattered self. We see the malevolent ring finally overcome him at the cracks of doom as he claims it, or worse yet, is claimed by it. We see him after his eucatastrophic success, pale and worn and yet himself again. And we see him during the scouring of the Shire, grown, not in body like Miriam did, but spirit. And Saruman sees it too. After Saruman tries to murder Frodo commands everyone to let Saruman be, saying, "He was great once, of a noble kind that we should not dare to raise our hands against. He is fallen, and his cure is beyond us, but I would still spare him in the hope that he may find it." Where Saruman has become so disformed that he cannot see Gandalf for what he truly is, Frodo's euformation has empowered him to see Saruman for what he once was. Saruman then looks at Frodo with mingled wonder and respect and hatred, saying, "You have grown, haven't you? Yes, you have grown very much." Frodo shows pity for Saruman's fall, which presents a stark contrast to how we see him in reference to Gollum at the beginning. So pity is the significant term, and it's one that has moral and imaginative worth for Tolkien, and it is used to describe, as he says, defines it in one of his letters, the kind of interaction that restrains one from doing something immediately desirable and seemingly advantageous. It is marked not only by sorrow for the low estate of another, but also by a desire for the other's good. It is a theologically grounded way of being in the world, only embodied by the noble or the ennobling, and as such is fiercely opposed to Saruman's cruelty, indifference, and spite. Saruman's dysformation kills his capacity for pity so that he disregards others except as far as they serve him. However, as far as Frodo grows, his capacity for pity increases, and this is the marker of euformation. In the end, it is pity that ultimately allows the quest to be achieved. Frodo's capacity to express pity flows out of his euformative journey of self-sacrifice and renunciation. In the end, the Shire is saved, but not for him. As Frodo says, it must often be so, Sam, when things are in danger. Someone has to give them up, lose them, so that others may keep them. Frodo gives them up so that Sam and his family, and obviously others, can keep them. He has paid the price, but his reward awaits beyond the walls of the world where, at last, on a night of rain, Frodo smelled the sweet fragrance on the air and heard the sounds. And then it seemed to him that the gray rain curtain turned all to silver glass and was rolled back. And he beheld white shores, and beyond them a far green country where swift sunrise.
Plenty of time for questions.
I trimmed that down significantly because I really do want your questions more so than at other places where I presented my research, because I'm really curious, ways in which you can push my thinking and my research on this. So, fire away. Yes, sir.
So you say there's a change between, or I guess, how Frodo views or treats Saruman and how he treats Gollum. And obviously, as they go along, he has, I guess you can almost say, respect for Gollum, or pity, like Sam, things like that. Do you think that's because he's seen what can happen with like the providence of the eucatastrophic kind of thing? Like he's seen, all right, goods come out of the evil that's been going on with Gollum. Maybe something like that could happen here with Saruman as well.
I think so, and some of that I'm trying to draw out more in my larger work. It comes from his association, the euformative communities I refer to, that he's part of with Gandalf, and that kind of attitude toward others, that their restoration and redemption is possible, maybe not by us, maybe not by humanity or even the elves, but it is still possible. And so I think Frodo has kind of absorbed that, and he's seen that at work, because I'm doing a chapter on Gollum and Smeagol, that there is a transition, there is a growth, there is a euformative trajectory that Gollum is experiencing, in which he is being redeemed, he is being restored. And Tolkien says that he's on a knife edge. He could have gone one way or the other, and even explores in one of his letters what the end of the story may have looked like had Gollum chosen differently. That maybe he still would have, bitten the ring off Frodo's finger, but willingly cast himself into the fire. So I think Frodo has seen firsthand this kind of growth and change is possible. And if it's possible with Gollum, then it can certainly be possible with Saruman. So, yes. Yes.
Do you feel that this euphemistic quality about Frodo comes from Tolkien's sort of grasp of the gospel, where Christ says that if a man loses his life, he can gain it? I think that's a feeling behind that.
Maybe, because there is a sense in which he describes elsewhere, I think particularly in his letters, ideas of renunciation and the similar idea of dying to self. So I think that's at work there. I think I'll need to think about that a little bit more to try to flesh out that connection. But I think you know.
I have a question. I don't expect you to have an answer, but I'm wondering, since we, the reader, see Gollum not redeemed and Saruman not redeemed, it seems that on one hand, Tolkien wants us to see through Frodo's eyes that there's a possibility of redemption, and on the other hand, clearly there isn't, though, in the fates of Gollum and Saruman.
I think that this kind of touches on what we've already, hinted at, that in the context of the world, we are working with, the long defeat. That there is always the potential for both restoration or euformation and dysformation. There is always the possibility for both. The characters' choices matter. They can choose one way or the other. And, maybe we can draw out reasons why they maybe aren't quite as free to choose something as they could be based on their previous choices. But they still could have chosen differently. And I think for both of them, for Gollum and Saruman, there's a point at which they're teetering. And they recognize they could go one way or the other. They could respond in one way or the other. And for Gollum, perhaps, Sam's distrust pushes him over the edge. He still has freedom to respond in a different way. But Saruman seems to deliberately choose. No, I don't want that. I don't want to be part of that. In part because that has to be me admitting that I have fallen short, that I have done something that I ought not to have done. I have forsaken the mission I was sent on. So the redemption is possible. They could have chosen differently, yet this being a long defeat, inevitably, people, whether they're angelic beings or humans, will choose either direction. And yeah, I think we only see in Frodo kind of this succession of kind of giving his utmost toward the good end. But I guess actually we see it better.
Talking about redemption, we had another discussion about Gollum. I can see why Gollum could find redemption, because it was this little thing he sinned. Saruman, you said it very well. He comes from one of the most powerful beings, and he falls down to something even lesser than Gollum in some way. So, what kind of redemption could he have? Go back to what he was. Is it even possible to imagine that he could be a mystery again?
That's a good question, and I would lean toward maybe eventually. I think that's my answer. But certainly redemption for him would look different. And in the same way that his dysformation was a long and protracted process, his euformation would also need to be. And some of what I don't think I attended to as well in this, I was trying to shorten so much that I think I cut out some stuff that would have possibly been more helpful, is the role of the community. And for him, as for Gollum, they have separated themselves from community. They have isolated themselves so completely that they no longer have the access to the community that can help them to grow and to develop and to change. I think I jogged or loose. There. Yeah. Yes.
So with Saruman and just after the destruction of the ring, there is this image of a gust of wind from the west that dispels the grey clouds, so to speak. For you, is that a product of the character's free will to not be redeemed until the very end, or is it an illustration of the kind of of the ambivalence of the Valar and their kind of the question of their benevolence?
I think it's reflective of the choices that Saruman has made. Because I think essentially he ends up in a similar place to that of Sauron. Yeah, Tolkien says in one of his letters that the indestructibility of created spirits, especially those with free will, kind of needs to be presupposed based on his understanding of the world and how things are. And so Saruman's spirit cannot be like annihilated. There is no option for that. But he also has freely chosen to isolate himself and to kind of do his own thing to such a degree that, yeah, it's possible that like Sauron's choice, hey, come back to Valinor, say you did wrong, we'll welcome you back, we'll restore you. He says, I don't want that. Maybe in the same way Saruman could have or would have chosen the same thing. And he essentially does. He essentially says to Galadriel and to Gandalf, I want no part of this. You stay away from me. So I think it's the result of his free choices. Time for one more?
We don't.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'll talk to you later.